This is part 2 of a 3-part series of me expanding my shop. If you missed part 1, check it out. You'll learn more about my shop and what I do in here, and you'll see what an ordeal it was to get the stuff cleaned out of this space and get the gravel in here and compact it and the vapor barrier in place and get the form set and everything that I had to do to lead up to the moment when the mud shows up. Now I've got another video about pouring concrete where I go into exhaustive detail, or at least it seemed to me at the time to be exhaustive detail, about what's going on when you're getting this stuff in position and on the ground and that sort of thing. And so I'm not going to plow that ground all over again with this one. Rather, I'm going to point out some of the differences between this pour and that one. The differences can almost entirely be explained if we think about allowable tolerances. Now, I've mentioned allowable tolerances in connection with construction choices before, and I will again because I spend a lot of time thinking about those things, or at least I used to spend a lot of time thinking about those things, because every job could quite possibly have a different allowable tolerance. That is, how perfect it needs to be versus how quickly it needs to be done. It's not good practice to only have one allowable tolerance, because not every person can afford perfect work, and not many people will accept sloppy work. And so you have to know who you're working for and what it is that they A, can afford, and B, expect when you're making the choices about how much time to spend moment by moment in your construction process. And in this little project, I'm working on the concrete floor in my own shop, so the allowable tolerances are entirely up to me.
Scott, it's raining. Does that make you feel better?
Makes me feel better now. It's going to blow in on that edge.
Good, good, good.
Want to start with the shorty, Dustin?
Now, adjusting the allowable tolerances on your work is a slippery slope, and you've always got to be second-guessing yourself and deciding whether you are agreeing to a less precise outcome because you're lazy or because there's some other really irresistible pressure from time or budget or expectation that just has to be accommodated. On this little shop floor, I decided to widen the allowable tolerances in 3 areas: the amount of rebar, method of crack control, and degree of finish. There were a couple of areas where I I guess there were 3 areas that I was utterly unwilling to adjust the allowable tolerances. And the first was on the compaction of the subgrade. The second was on the thickness of the slab. That is the wrong place to try to save money, is on skimping on concrete volume. And the third one was on the mix design. This is a 6-sack pumpable mix, 50-50 on the aggregate. That is, half the rock will pass through a 3/4 inch screen, half the rock will pass through a 3/8 inch screen. It's got a little extra sand, got plenty of cement. It breaks at a very high compressive strength, in excess of 3,500 psi all the time. I don't know what else they put in there, but it's a great mix. We got it at a nice slump, probably about a 4, if I remember. At least the first load was around a 4. So it's a continual responsibility to decide what tolerance for what job, for what client, on what given day. But as you stay longer and longer in the trades, be aware your temptation and your tendency is going to be to get sloppier and to rationalize rougher work for the sake of the bottom line. And that's a mistake. That has stigmatized too much of the construction industry. And you got to do everything in your power to resist that. One of the blessings of having been a general contractor for 24 years is I've identified a stellar group of subcontractors. And when you work with people who take pride in their work, it's not long before they become your friends, if you treat them fairly. And then once they become your friends, you have to be careful that you don't abuse them, because friends help each other when friends are in need. And while I am very clear on the fact that if I have a job that I'm taking for someone else and I call these guys to help me, they're going to charge me. And it's going to be a fair price. And when I say fair, I mean fair to both parties. But if any of these guys have a problem or need a tool that I have and they don't have, or have had a little bad luck in their life, or are adding on to something that's just for their own quality of life rather than their own financial gain, I love to help them. And they love to help me. And that is a good thing. It simplifies life. And there's nothing better than a social interaction that also includes producing good work. It's satisfying on so many levels. There are some fellows, in fact most of us, when we help somebody, darn it, we expect them to help us. Well, maybe that's all right. But then it turns out you weren't really helping them, were you? You were simply making a different kind of an investment. There was a Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius. A lot of his philosophy, he was a Stoic, by the way, is preserved in the book Meditations. Great book. Highly recommend it. He had a quotation in there about this, which I will butcher, but I think I can get the intent. And he said that there are three kinds of men. There's the man who will help you and will absolutely expect to be repaid in kind. There's the kind of man who will help you, and while he may not expect to be repaid, he will never be able to forget that he helped you, and will never be able to forget if you neglect to help him. And there's the man who helps others and does good work as naturally and as unconcerned with being repaid as a grapevine is when it bears its fruit. Now, I'm sorry for you who really know Marcus Aurelius for the way that I butchered that, but the idea is the thing that's important. That's what these guys are like. Dustin's operating a power trowel here. A power trowel is a great tool for a job like this. It's faster. In many ways, it does a better job. And the big thing is you can work it standing up and you're not bent over and on knee boards and wearing out your wrists and your shoulders working along 3 inches at a swipe, but you're covering a lot of ground. This is a 36-inch power trowel. That's on the small side. That means it's on the light side, so two guys can easily move it around and set it on and off of the slab without breaking your back or digging holes as you lay it on or lift it up, which makes it really nice. I had a 48-inch Whiteman. I sold it a year or so ago when I wasn't doing much concrete anymore. And it would cover more ground, and it was a powerhouse. But man, it was heavy, and it was easy to really be sorry when you were trying to lay that thing down on a slab or pick it up. I would usually try to back my truck up next to the slab and let the crane do the heavy lifting, but I don't miss that heavy old girl. You see that pan that Dustin's got on this power trowel? That enables the trowel to function as a float and bring a lot of cream to the top and sort of level out some highs and some lows, but you've got to know how to use it, or instead of leveling the slab out, you'll be pushing waves and valleys and bird baths into it, but thankfully Dustin knows how to use it. There are big power trowels, 2 blades and 3 blades that you sit on and operate with a pair of joysticks, and man, one guy can cover a big chunk of a Walmart floor or any other big slab by himself. They just, I don't know how many finishers they put out of work, but they sure are a nice thing. And nobody has ever trusted me to sit on one of those things. And I think that's probably good judgment on their part. The crack control here is a little different than you might be used to seeing. We take his torpedo jointer and score a line through the slab, and it's deep, about 1.25 inches deep. Let it set up just a little bit and then finish right back over the top of it again. It saves a ton of time of having to get out there on knee boards or, run the wider flanged jointer over the top to smooth it up, and then to time those operations with the finishing of the area in between. And even though this type of crack control is not recognized or certified by the American Concrete Institute, doggone it, in a lot of cases it's just good enough. And today, in my shop, on my floor, it's plenty good enough. You got two things you can control on a power trowel: how fast it's spinning and the angle of the blades relative to the work. In general, the harder the work, the harder the concrete gets, the faster you spin it and the steeper the angle on the blades. You start out with them laid down nice and flat and turning really slow to sort of float and regrade and level. But then as it gets hard and as the day goes on, and in this case a long time, as this cold mix on a cold day in a shady shop was taking forever to set up, you can speed that thing up and rock those blades up and burn it in harder and harder and harder. We didn't take it that far or that smooth, but those are the decisions you've got to make all the time, and then what direction you're running the machine and how you overlap your passes. And it takes practice, and Dustin's really good at it, and I'm only sort of a beginner. Anybody can put concrete on the ground, and it's certainly going to get hard. The challenge is making it flat and making it smooth. Two different things. Flat is in a plane. Smooth is not rough. So the first thing, and the thing that has to happen in a hurry, is to get it on the ground and get it flat. That's what happens when you're screeding or rodding off. Screeding or rodding off, depending on what part of the country you live in, I guess. The top of the mud. If you don't get it flat, when you lay it down, it's really hard to get it flat with a bull float. And if you don't get it flat with the bull float, it's hard to get it flat with a power trowel. In fact, it's just not going to happen. But you never really know for sure how flat your laydown was until you put the power trowel on it. And then, if the power trowel is smooth and steady as it moves back and forth across the concrete with the blade spinning, you think, yeah, nice flat floor. But if it's rocking back and forth, or sometimes even jumping around if the slab has really got a lot of highs and lows in it, you know it's too late. There's not a lot you can do, and you just kind of have to ride the horse you saddle and get to the end of the day and hope that nobody trips when they're walking across that floor, or the forklifts are not, losing their load as they come across a warehouse floor at high speed with something on the forks. It's sometimes very important. And there are sometimes flatness factors, or F factors, specified on plans for commercial work. Well, thankfully, we don't have to worry about that. It's my shop after all. But if you look at this power trowel going back and forth, it's sitting there pretty darn steady, running back and forth, solid as a rock. And I'm happy and optimistic that this floor is nice and flat, and it'll feel good underfoot.